Okay, let's just go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for joining me today. Today I'm excited to present to you the new X2 controller, a product that's important to Horner that we've been working on for some time. Some of you may have gotten wind of it or have attended one of our roadmap webinars where we detailed the fact that it was on its way. And today is the official product launch webinar for the product. So let's dive right in. Our agenda today, of course, is to introduce the X2 to you, our channel partners. What is the X2? Where does it fit in the OCS product lineup? Of course, we always try and put things into perspective when we release a new product. We'll, of course, go through the features and the functions of the X2. We're going to spend some time looking at the competitive landscape where the X2 is competing. To take a look at what other products are there, what their capabilities are, and how they compare and contrast to the X2. We're also going to cover a little bit some example applications. The X2 is a very general purpose product, but we want to kind of get the gears turning in your head into different areas, different applications where the X2 could be used. And of course, we're going to go through all the commercial details in terms of pricing and availability and order quantities and all those sorts of good things. Okay, so getting started with what is the X2? Of course, it's the newest Horner OCS all-in-one controller. And for years, the XLE has been our entry-level point to our OCS product line. Back in 2006, when the XLE was originally introduced, it definitely had a big impact on sales, not only for the XLE directly, but also for the rest of the product line. So we know that entry-level products are important to introduce new products or new customers to Horner at new price points. And then the X2 just brings that price point even lower. Many of you probably sat through our XLE XLT update webinar that we had just a few weeks ago, where we talked about the fact that those products have now been updated to make them viable products for years to come because they still remain very popular. The X2 is now our new entry-level product. It's in the same price range as smart relay type products, which are products which are much lower end than we have competed with before. And the X2 offers full OCS functionality and performance. Some features have been stripped back a bit, but it's still much more feature-rich than anything else in its price class for sure. Another thing that we've always done well, and we continue it with the X2, is we maintain software compatibility so that you still use the same software tool, developing the same ladder logic and configuration files that can be used up and down our product line. And that's, again, still true with the X2. So you can take a program developed for the X2 and very easily migrate it upwards to the rest of our product line. So in the end, we feel very strongly that in addition to the direct sales that we'll receive from the X2, we'll get new accounts using OCS, and it's going to have a positive increased sales impact on the rest of our product lines. In terms of where the X2 fits in the Horner product lineup, as I just verbally told you, it is our new entry-level product. And you see here that there's a companion product to the X2, the X4, that will be available soon as well. And those two products now will make up our new entry-level point, supplementing of course, the XLE and XLT, and then the X5, all products which are very popular in our low end. And then of course the XL4 as well, which is a fantastic controller, extremely popular, definitely the most complete and most powerful quartered in controller available on the market. So these 6 products will effectively make up the low end of the Horner product line, but certainly offering much more capabilities than our competition at these price levels. Let's take a look at the physical highlights of the X2. We're going to compare it with the XLE, which is, again, a quartered in controller, which is 96 millimeters square on the front and about 58 millimeters deep. You'll see that the X2 has the exact same width as quartered in, but it is taller, and it's much shallower in terms of its depth. It's just about half the depth of our quartered in controllers in at 31 millimeters. So it'll fit in some real shallow, tight places that our quartered in products just won't fit. Continuing on with the physical highlights, you'll see that the product is washdown rated. So we do maintain NEMA 4X and IP66 environmental ratings with the product, so it's still fully sealed. It has a nice plastic feature built into the plastic body that is very handy when you're installing the unit. When you install a unit on the door, like the X2 or like the rest of our products, the first step, of course, is to create the cutout in the door, and then you place the product through the cutout, and then you have to install clips to maintain the seal and to affix the unit to the door. One of the challenges can be that after you put the product through that hole, it can, if you're not careful, it could have a tendency to fall out until the clips are affixed. So we've got this nice plastic feature at the top and the bottom, which effectively will hold it in place lightly, prevent it from falling back through the cutout until you get a chance to get the clips in place. And then speaking of the clips, those are an improved version of what we have been selling for many years. So in order to keep the price of the X2 where it needs to be, we needed some less expensive clips, but we didn't want to compromise on their holding capability. So we've designed some clips that we're very happy with that are made of a composite material as opposed to fully metal, and they hold extremely well and are very easy to use. So those are included with the X2 as well. And then the X2, like the X5, makes a very efficient use of space by putting all the connections on the back. Literally the only thing that is accessible that's not on the back is the micro SD slot, and it's conveniently located in an area on the side where when you open the door of the enclosure, that micro SD slot is right there and fully available. So you see the vertical orientation of the X2 is definitely a benefit when it comes to micro SD access. Now, all Horner all-in-one controllers have 4 different elements to their functionality: operator interface, control, I/O, and communications or networking. So those 4 elements are all an integral part of every all-in-one controller that we make, and the X2 is no different. But let's start talking about the operator interface functionality of the X2. First of all, the X2 is based around a graphic display. So most products in this price range where it competes are based around text-based displays. Of course, you can find graphical HMIs in the low end, but you don't find all-in-one controllers with full control capability that include graphical HMIs. But the X2 does. So it's a pixel-based display, 128 by 64. It has the same pixel makeup as the XLE. So what that's going to mean is it's going to be very easy for customers to migrate up to an XLE when needed. They can migrate to any Horner product with their logic and the rest of their configuration, but migrating to an XLE from a graphic standpoint is going to be really easy. As you'll see that like the XLE, the X2 is a key-based unit from a user interface standpoint. So it utilizes long life dome keys of various types that provide excellent tactile feedback. So even though the keys are rather small, when you press on those keys, you get a very nice click, a very nice tactile feel. They feel really solid. And then we have various types of keys for different functions. So we'll start with the soft keys, which were up there by the screen. Those are used as the means of providing a key source for digital type object like push buttons, for instance, turning things on and off. We also have cursor keys that are useful for navigating different objects on the screen or navigating a menu, for instance. And let's talk about a menu for a bit here. Because it is a graphical screen, the X2 has flexible font support. So we can support fonts of a variety of different sizes. Of course, there are small fonts and larger fonts built in, but if you wanted, for instance, a super large font or a font of a certain, Cyrillic language or something like that, you could easily import it into your project and use it, again, because it's a graphical screen. That also allows us to support, as I was starting to mention, a menu type object. This kind of harkens back to the type of intuitive user interface that was used by the iPod. Now, the iPod back in the day, of course, now they're almost obsolete, but back in the day, it utilized click wheels and keys for navigation purposes, and it utilized a menu for navigation purposes. And that menu was very intuitive, and a lot of people just naturally knew how to use it. Same is true with the X2. In all of our products, we allow a fully functional menu object that can provide great intuitive navigation for the user interface even on a screen that's small and even on a key-based approach. Some other things to mention, we support bar graphs and analog meters, trends, and those sorts of things, again, because we're based around a graphic display. And we've got a full numeric keypad for data entry, and those numeric keys also perform double duty as function keys. So that's not to be forgotten as well. In terms of the screen memory, we far exceed anything that our competitors can do in this price range, even though it is a bit stripped down as compared to the rest of our product line. But we still provide up to 250 screens with up to 15 objects per screen, which again should not be a limitation for really any application at all. So that's a summary on the operator interface capabilities of the X2. Now let's move on to the control capabilities, or the logic CPU that's embedded in the X2. First of all, it has huge program space for this price range, 128K. Most of our competitors measure their capability for these level of products in how many programming blocks they provide. You know, we can support 200 programming blocks or 400 programming blocks, and those are just individual elements that can be used in logic. A couple of them will give a K figure as a backup as well. We provide a full 128K of memory space for program logic, so no worries there of running out of space for sure. From the standpoint of variable and register space, we support 5,000 word type variables and 2,048 bit type variables. All the word type variables are retentive, and then half of those bit types are retentive as well. So again, variable space, there's a tremendous amount available to you. From a scan rate standpoint, the X2 offers really good performance. It's actually similar to the performance of the original Generation 1 XLE, which had very few complaints about performance. And for the types of applications that they'll be doing with the X2, customers will be doing with the X2, I expect them to be extremely happy with the performance level here. And then in terms of the instruction set, one thing you'll see with products in this price range is very stripped down instruction sets, or even though they're ladder based, they may even appear to be kind of different languages. We don't do that with the X2. It follows the standard Cscape instruction set. It's got the full instruction list available to it, or the full instructions available to it in ladder. You've got integer, double integer, and floating point math. You've got, you know, all the support for moves and Boolean operations, and really the full command set. And we do support PID loops up to 4 with auto tuning. So lots of functionality there. And again, you can migrate your program completely up and down the OCS product line. Develop a program for the X2, want to run it in an XL4 in a few months, no problem. You can do that with no difficulty whatsoever. Not something our competitors can say for sure. Now let's dive into the I/O capacity of the X2. So we have 2 models of X2 available, 2 part numbers that you can order, a Model R and a Model A. And the only differences between those 2 really are the output types, the digital output types, and I'll go into that in more detail. But the Model R utilizes relays, and it has a total of 26 I/O points. The Model A is strictly solid state on the output side. It has 30 total I/O points. Now, compare that with our competitors, and when we get into some of the charts later on, you'll see that most of our competitors' base models are 12 I/O points. So you can see that we greatly exceed that and have really less of a need to have to expand. But if you do need to expand, the amount of I/O memory that is available for expansion with the X2 is way up there. You've got 1,024 digital in and out that you could add, and 256 analog in and out. So you're not going to run out of I/O registers, no question there. Now, from the physical connections that are made with the X2, we feel really good about what we're going to be able to offer customers in terms of their physical experience in wiring the product. First of all, everything is based on removable terminals from an I/O standpoint. They're easily removed with a small screwdriver. We've designed in pry points. It may look like a tight fit, but we've designed in specific pry points that very easily can remove those plugs just with a quick flick of the screwdriver. And we've also based those plugs around screw type connectors. Now, one of the benefits of screw type is you can support a wider range of wire sizes. So the X2 can support anywhere from 14 to 24 AWG wire sizes. I would guess most customers will probably use 16 or 18 gauge just because of the ease of use there. But you do have the capability of using larger wire if you want. Like we often do, we've color-coded the plugs so that the orange plugs are used for the inputs, both digital and analog, as well as the analog outputs. And then the black plug is used for the digital outputs. Now, the units are clearly silk screened, so if you need to work on a particular wire or troubleshoot a particular wire, you can see which one you're dealing with. And each connector has a different number of pins to reduce the possibility of connection errors, plugging the wrong plug into the wrong socket. That's going to be very difficult for them to do just because it's fairly obvious in terms of not only the color, but also the number of pins for each connector. And with the I/O, there's absolutely no jumpers to set for any I/O configuration. That's nice as well. All right, now let's dive into the individual I/O types, starting with the digital inputs. The digital inputs can support either 12 volt or 24 volt voltage levels. They can also support positive or negative logic, where of course positive logic, where you run the plus signal through the switch, is by far the most popular. Sometimes that's called syncing inputs. But both syncing and sourcing inputs can be supported, positive and negative logic. And there's no jumpers to set to do that. You can just set that in Cscape and then wire it up appropriately. Now, of the 12 dedicated digital inputs, 4 of them can be used for high-speed counting. And the high-speed counting capabilities of the X2 is definitely best in class for sure. You've got 4 high-speed counter signals built in, and we can support frequencies up to 10 kilohertz with the X2. And that's not just for totalizing. We can do 10 kilohertz using quadrature as well. So if you're using a quadrature encoder, for instance, wired to a couple of the input pins for the high speed, it doesn't take your 10K frequency support down to 2.5K. You get the full 10K support. So that's a performance advantage that the X2 definitely has. Moving on to analog. What you'll find in this price range, for the most part, are inputs that our competitors use for either straight digital inputs, some of which can be shared with high-speed signals, some of which can be shared with analog signals. So you typically don't have dedicated analog inputs built into a programmable relay type product. What you have are add-on analog blocks that are fairly expensive, or you have shared inputs that can be either digital or analog. With the X2, we've taken a completely different approach. We've got 4 dedicated analog inputs, and there's several other ways in which we're superior as well. First of all, programmable relays, for the most part, support 0 to 10 volts built in. Nothing wrong with 0 to 10 volts, but 4 to 20 milliamps is much more popular, and the X2 supports that natively. Also, almost every programmable relay you'll find has 10-bit resolution. So that means you've got about 1,000 steps from 0 to 10 volts. What we provide is 4 times the resolution, so 12-bit resolution, which gives you more than 4,000 steps over 4 to 20 milliamps. So again, far superior on the analog input side with the X2. And then it goes without saying that the fact that we include 2 analog outputs with the X2 also means that we're providing something that none of the other competitors do built in, and that is 2 actual outputs built into the product. Analog outputs are available with programmable relays, but you've got to order them separately as a separate block, and they are quite expensive. So when you start adding things to the base unit, that's where you really start getting the money to raise with our competition. We've managed to build a lot of that into the X2 just to make it more versatile and really more cost-effective ultimately. Another thing to mention about our analog, the specification on the analog is 1.5% from an accuracy standpoint. Now that may not sound all that accurate, but that's just the accuracy that comes out of the factory. It's very easy, and we'll have white papers that detail it. It's very easy to do field calibration with just a couple rungs of logic that will allow you to really dial in that accuracy much closer than 1.5%. And the beauty of doing it in the field is you're not just calibrating the analog input, you're calibrating the system. So the entire system, which will include not only the analog inputs on the X2, but also the sensor and or the transmitter that's connected, if there is a transmitter involved, that whole system will be calibrated in the field to much tighter accuracy. So that's a better way to do it in general, regardless of what the factory accuracy is of the analog inputs for the controller. And another thing to mention, all the analog inputs are 24-volt fault tolerant. So if you have a transmitter that fails by shorting to power of 24 volts, there won't be any damage caused to the analog input. Okay, now let's start talking about digital outputs, starting with the Model A. That's the model that is strictly solid state. So the Model A has 12 total digital outputs, 4 of which are in one group and 8 of which are in a second group. Also, of the 12 outputs, 2 of them have high speed capabilities. So that means they could be used as a frequency output, where you vary the frequency up to 10 kilohertz, for instance. They could be used as a PWM output, where you have a fixed frequency, let's say of 0 to 1K or of 1K, and you vary the duty cycle from 0 to 100% of the pulse width. That's also doable, of course. And then another nice functionality we've included is kind of like a CAM type output or a programmable limit type output, where you can fire the outputs independent of logic scan based on an encoder count coming into one of the high-speed counters. So that's also a very powerful feature. So you've got, again, 3 different modes that are supported for high-speed outputs, although we are not supporting at this time a stepper type output functionality for trapezoidal move profiles. That's something we'll consider for the future, but it's not included at this stage. Another thing I'll mention is a lot of the competition uses quarter amp or 1/3 amp outputs for their low-end solid-state outputs. We provide full, robust half-amp outputs. So we've got that full capability to drive even more loads directly than what some of our competitors can do with a DC product. So we can drive a variety of different, solenoids and valves and other products, motor starters, etc. Many of which we'll be able to drive those directly, where in some cases our competition will kind of run out of juice because of the fact they're using only 0.3 or 0.25 amp output capability. Okay, moving on to the Model R outputs. These are relay based. So as opposed to having 12 solid state outputs, what we have are 6 relay outputs, and then we also have 2 solid state outputs to maintain high-speed output capability. So you don't lose the capability of having PWM or frequency or set point controlled outputs by using relays. You get 6 3-amp rated relays that are all isolated from each other, so you can use a mix and match of different voltages, both AC and DC, and you still get 2 outputs that you can use for high-speed purposes. So that's very versatile. So 8 total outputs with a Model R, 6 of which are relay-based. Okay, now let's move to communications for the X2. Communications is something that Horner has always done well, and that stays true with the X2. So we've got a USB Mini B port for programming. That's becoming more or less standard these days, as you would expect. So that allows for a direct connection with your computer without any kind of adapter or anything in order to program the unit from Seascape. We do support an RS-232/RS-485 port built in, where you can select between one of those 2 communication schemes, either 232 or 485. And that can be used again for programming, like we traditionally have done with our USB to serial adapter. And it's also required for firmware updates. So as firmware updates happen, they will need to use that serial port for firmware updates. From a protocol standpoint, the primary protocols used on that port are Modbus RTU as a master or a slave. We're not gearing that serial port for general purpose use for a variety of specialty protocols. We're focusing it on Modbus master and slave, and then we're also supporting ASCII type character communication for things like barcode readers and line printers and those sorts of things, receipt printers, those sort of things. So that's the serial port functionality built into the X2. But with that RS-485 Modbus RTU master capability comes the capability to control variable frequency drives, for instance, which is a very, very common application in control and getting down into some pretty low end stuff. So that's not only do we have analog that could interface with a drive, we can control the drive strictly over a serial port that frees up that analog for sensors and other type apparatus. All right, now let's move off of the serial port and talk about the CAN port. Like all of our products, we've included CAN built into the product. And like the X5, which we introduced about 15 months ago, it is an RJ45 style connector for CAN. But one thing we did a little better this time is we've changed the color of that port to be different. So we've got a black port for our serial port that's RJ45 based, and we've got a red CAN port that should stand out and call attention to the fact that it's not the same as the other port. So that CAN is built in, and it can be used for IO expansion. So even though we've got 26 or 30 IO points built in, if we want to have expansion IO or additional IO, we can add them using any of our standard CAN-based IO families. And we can also use it for controller-to-controller communication. So if you had a few X2s that you wanted to be sharing data or communicating with each other on a work cell, for instance, that's fully capable using the CAN port. And all the network termination that is needed for both CAN and RS-485 can all be set from the system menu, as well as the bias that is sometimes needs to be adjusted for RS-485 networks. That can also be set from the system menu. So no external resistors required in the case of the X2, and certainly no jumpers required, or dip switches for that matter. Now, it's important to note, the X2 does not support other CAN protocols other than C-SCAN. So it doesn't support CAN Open. It doesn't support the J1939 vehicular standard or mobile standard. So for those protocols, as well as other specialty serial protocols, you'll need to upgrade to an XLE. So that's a differentiator between the X2 and products higher than the X2 are some of those other CAN-based and serial-based protocols. Okay, so we've covered the four major functions of any all-in-one controller from Horner, and that is, of course, the HMI functionality, the CPU or logic capability, the I/O capability, and the communications capability. Now we're going to move on to some other features, and we'll talk about ratings as well. So let's start with micro SD. And as I've mentioned many times to you before, because it's something that I'm quite proud of, we were the first industrial company in the world back in 2006 to introduce an industrial product using micro SD. And as I was doing competitive analysis for this webinar and earlier, I noticed that finally one of our competitors in the low end has added micro SD to their programmable relay, and they did that in 2016. So they were exactly 10 years behind us, but they finally got there. Oh, but we're supporting microSD, the extra capacity version up to 32 gigabytes. And as the cards get bigger than 32 gigabytes, we have a plan of handling that. And like all of our products, you can use the microSD for data logging. You can use it for loading programs, saving programs, cloning units in a production environment. All the things you can do with microSD with other OCS products, you can do with the X2. From a DC standpoint, this is a definite difference. The X2 is 24 volt DC powered, whereas most of the rest of our models have wide range 10 to 30 volts, which allows them to be used in a 12 volt system. The X2 is designed for a 24 volt system, plus or minus 10%. So if you do want to run an X2 in a 12 volt environment, you will need to use a small DC to DC converter. It's a little small power supply that would take the 12 volt input, convert it to a 24 volt level to power the X2. So that's something you would need to do. Or you could upgrade to another OCS model like an XLT or an XLE or any of the other ones that have 12 volt capability. From a temperature rating standpoint, we can handle minus 10 C to plus 60 C, which is a good wide range, but you don't have the option of going all the way down to minus 40 like you do with some of the other models, or ordering it with a built-in heater. That's not an option. So minus 10 C to plus 60 C is the temperature range. For an environmental rating, we've talked about the fact, of course, that we are supporting NEMA 4X for washdown as well as IP66, and we'll have the UL type ratings there, so the UL inspector will be happy, and we'll be carrying the Class 1 Division 2 hazardous locations ratings. Now, it's important to note that UL is still currently pending, so we won't have the UL officially until April or May. Now, there's no risk, no worry about any not passing UL or anything like that. And the reason we're launching the product before the UL is complete is because this is an OEM product, like many of our products. And OEMs take weeks and months in many cases to develop their machines and to get them ready for production. So the product is fully ready with the exception of the UL sticker. So let's get those units in the hands of OEMs so they can start their development, get their machines designed, get them proven out, and then well in advance of when they start production, we'll have UL approvals on all the models, so that won't be an issue. Okay, we've covered the features and functions fairly thoroughly in terms of the hardware of the X2, but now let's take a look at the competitive landscape. Who else is out there? What types of products are we likely to compete against? So let's go there now. So really, when we designed the X2, we designed it to compete in a similar price range as programmable relays, smart relays, whatever you want to call them, okay? And we knew that even though we probably couldn't get exactly to the lowest prices that those products offer, we knew that if we got close enough, we could offer the user a far better user experience with a lot more functionality. And a lot of folks who have told us that they really would rather not use a smart relay will now have the option of going to a product that is far more capable and just a little more expensive than maybe what they're using currently. Or maybe it's not more expensive because they needed more capabilities than what's built into the base unit. So with a programmable relay application, they had to use an expansion unit or two. And at that point, then the X2 is even less expensive than what they're using. So if we take a look for the most part at smart relays, what you typically find is the base models have about 12 I/O points, so 8 inputs and 4 outputs, and then they're expandable using additional I/O, both digital and analog, up to the range of about 28 to 60 points total. The approach we took with the X2, as I've mentioned earlier in the broadcast, is we've said, hey, let's come up with 2 models that can cover a whole variety of applications throughout the space so that we don't have to, our users don't have to continually update and expand their systems and add on to their systems in order to do, routine applications. The base unit can do pretty much everything they need. And if they do have those rare occasions where they get above 30 I/O points, we have our full I/O family that they can choose from to expand to. Okay, so we've got the approach of a couple of models to cover the range. The programmable relays really take more of a modular approach, but really once you start adding to the base model, the prices go up pretty quickly. So let's start taking a look at some of the details of some of what you see in this landscape when you look at smart relay type products. And I've got some common competitors up here from IDEC and Siemens, Allen Bradley and Eaton, Mitsubishi, and you'll notice that some of them look really similar to each other, and that's because there's really not that many people making these products, but a lot of people branding these products. So you've got an environment with a lot of specialized programming that doesn't fit in well with the rest of their product lines, and these products, even though they're functional, become on a bit of an island when it comes to comparing or when it comes to trying to move logic that you've developed for a low-end application up into a different product family. That's not the case with the X2. Okay, so let's take a look at the base number of I/O, which with the X2 is either 26 or 30, and typically with these other products that are in the programmable relay range, you're looking at about 12. From a digital input standpoint, those are all pretty much 8 digital inputs. Now the competitors share those digital inputs, some of those digital inputs anyway, with analog points. So they don't have any dedicated analog inputs, which the X2 does. The X2 not only has 12 digital inputs, it also has 4 dedicated analog inputs. In terms of the number of shared inputs, that ranges anywhere from either 2 in the case of the AB or the Eaton, to 4 in the case of the IDEC or the Siemens, all the way up to 8 with the Mitsubishi. But again, we're talking about 0 to 10 volt inputs, not 4 to 20 milliamps, which is much more popular. And we're talking about 10-bit resolution, not 12-bit resolution, which is much more functional. So the X2 trumps all those on the analog side. And then on the analog output side, none of them even include analog output in the base unit. We have 2 built right in. You can add analog to any of those other guys, but it's quite expensive to add those additional analog output channels. And then high-speed counting, we offer the most high-speed counter channels, and in addition to that, we offer the fastest supported frequencies, going all the way up to 10 kilohertz in all counting modes, twice as fast as either the IDEC or the Siemens, which are pretty new products. Those are 2016 updates of those product families. and then way faster than the 1K supported on the other three. And then from a screen type standpoint, we give a lot more flexibility with a graphic-based display. The other ones primarily have text functionality. Now, as we take a look at list price, you do see that you can get lower with those other products. You can get down to $160 for a really stripped down model, and we can't get down to there, but we can get OEM prices certainly below $200. And if they need to add anything at all, we're less expensive than the programmable relay solution. And if they really would prefer to have more functionality and get more out of their machines than what they're getting, the X2 is going to give them that for sure. And again, I'm going to hammer this point. If you want to take this code you've developed for a smart relay and use it in a higher end system, maybe for a micro PLC or some other application, you're going to start from scratch with it. With the X2, you just open the program in Cscape, change your targeted model, and away you go. So this is kind of the competitive analysis when you take a look at smart relays. Now, another competitor that is definitely out there in the marketplace that has had a lower end all-in-one controller for some time is Unitronics with their Jazz product. And it has been fairly successful. You do see quite a them out there in low-end applications. It is a smart relay class product with ladder logic programming. It's very limited in terms of its memory, and not as limited as some of the programmable relays out there. It does have some functionality to it, which isn't too bad. And it does have some capability to do PID with up to 4 loops as well. So it is a product that's in the space that's had some success. But again, if you take a look at the functionality and the capabilities of the X2 versus that product, it's no contest. From the standpoint of logic memory, we can support anywhere from 5 to 10 times as much logic memory as they can. They support 256 word type registers. We can support 5,000. They support 256 bit type variables. We support 2,048. Timer wise, they're limited to 65 timers. Our timer limitation is only based on the fact it takes 2 registers per timer. So we in theory could do up to 2,500. From a programming standpoint, they support USB, we support USB, but if you go beyond that, you have to start adding to their product. So if you want a COM port, maybe you want to interface with a drive over RS-232 or RS-485, that's an option for the Jazz. It's included with the X2. Networking, optional for the Jazz, included with the X2. The HMI, they have a 2-line by 20 character display. We have a full graphics display. Simple graphic display, yes, but you can do much more with it than you can with a text-based display in terms of analog meters and bar graphs and menu objects and all those sorts of things. And then the simplicity of the product line. They've taken an approach where they have a wide variety of models, actually more than 11 even, but they have 11 different I/O combinations that you can order with kind of oddball combinations of different shared signal types and that sort of thing. We've tried to keep it really simple. 2 models. 12 inputs, 12 outputs, 4 analog in, 2 analog out in a fully solid state model, or 12 digital in, 6 relay out, plus 2 high-speed outputs, and then the 4 analog in and 2 analog out. So keep it really simple, cover the whole range with 2 models. And then our pricing is not as low as their lowest model for sure, but when you start going to slightly more functional units with slightly more I/O, we become as cost effective, if not even more so, with a lot more functionality. And Unitronics is no different than the guys in the programmable relay world in that they don't provide mobility of their programs throughout their product range. You're pretty much locked into that model and maybe one other. Okay, let's talk about example applications. And the X2 is very general purpose. You could probably tell through all I've covered so far that there's a lot it can do. It's got a lot of I/O. It's got analog capabilities, well beyond what people normally expect in this price range. So there's a lot of things it can do. But I just want to get the gears turning in terms of some of the different applications that the X2 is capable of. Things like lighting control, pump control. Pump control is a big one. You've got, again, that full support for interfacing with variable frequency drives over RS-485 Modbus. It's got great analog capability, so if there's any kind of sensors that are required, you can dedicate your networking connection for the drive and still have plenty of analog left over to interface with sensors. Building automation is a great fit. Doing HVAC or fan control or blower control, whatever the case may be. The analog capability lends itself really well for level measurement. So, if you've got an ultrasonic sensor that you want to use for control purposes or maybe just for monitoring purposes, the X2 is ideal for that with great resolution with the 12-bit resolution. Irrigation is an application that the X2 could do well. We've got that serial port. We could interface with a radio modem for Modbus capabilities. So now you can distribute X2s wirelessly using a wireless radio throughout a facility for irrigation or other purposes. It'd be great for metering or mixing. Maybe you've got a couple of different chemicals that need to be mixed in a certain ratio to provide an output or a mixed chemical. The X2 would be fantastic for that. Dispensing machines, even a small car wash based on the amount of I/O that we've included with the unit. So there's so much you can do with the X2. It's really just limited by your imagination, but we've tried to put a few things up on this slide to kind of get you thinking. Okay, now let's take a look at the launch package for the X2. So later this month, we will be putting literature, some of which is the same literature that is available for download now from the GoToMeeting or the GoToWebinar control panel under handouts. But some of those sales sheets will be placed on the channel portal. And remember, the channel portal is the area in our website that's exclusively reserved for our channel partners. So if you log on to HornerAutomation.com using your normal credentials, you'll have a tab that shows up that says Channel Portal. And from that location, you can get all kinds of information such as pricing, logos, all kinds of information that's exclusively available to our channel partners. And we'll be putting not only the price sheets and other material up there in advance of the general public. There'll be there's always all kinds of good stuff up there for you. And then in early February, we'll be updating our product pages for the general public. And we're really going to be focusing not only, of course, on the normal great materials that we have up there and the details that we share on a product from an online basis, but we're really focusing on online training with the X2. The X2 is going to bring a lot of new customers to the OCS product line, and they'll need to be trained. And that's a potentially worrisome burden for resources at both our channel partners as well as our support team. So what we've really focused on is creating online video-based training to take a new Horner user who's never used any of Horner product before and really walk them through the process in a series of videos, from opening the box and examining the hardware, to making a connection from Cscape after it's been downloaded, to doing simple programming from a logic standpoint, to manipulating objects on the screen, all the different aspects of an application, covering that all from soup to nuts in video form, and allowing those guys to get fully trained up, freeing up our normal sales and tech support resources to help other more complex issues, to help solve more complex issues with other customers. So that's a big focus with the X2. And then, of course, technical documentation with cut sheets and the user's manual, which kind of our standard material. But then we're also doing a quick start guide with the X2 because it is a low-end product and people sometimes tend to just grab and go. We're going to provide a quick start guide that'll hopefully help them do that more successfully. Okay, let's talk about the commercial details. All right, we've got two models. We've got the HE-X2R, that's the unit with relay outputs, list price of $235, and at the same price, we have the fully solid state model, which is the X2A. Okay, so one list price to remember, that's $235. Now, we're offering the lowest distributor multiplier, standard distributor multiplier we've ever offered on a product with the X2. So distributors are going to get a 635 multiplier, whereas the normal multiplier for OCS is a 6.5 typically, okay? And we're recommending, this is nothing that we're going to publish, but we're recommending that for volume OEMs, that you provide them with pricing below the $200 mark at $199. So we think that optics means a lot to those guys who are used to spending somewhere in that range of $150 to $200. that you can get them there with the X2. Now, in exchange for this great multiplier, we are placing one requirement, and that is that the X2s will be purchased in carton quantities or box quantities. So 24 of each come per box, and so you'll be purchasing them in those quantities. So that sounds like a lot, but in reality, the net distributor price for a carton of 24 X2 products is only about $3,600. So we're not talking about a big financial investment, and we're talking about a product that's going to open the doors to the rest of our product line and get you exposed to some customers where you probably didn't have access to before. So a great list price, the lowest multiplier we've ever offered, an attractive volume OEM price that still leaves you plenty of margin, both from a percentage and a contribution standpoint. And the only requirement is that you buy them in 24-piece cartons. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about availability. So we're accepting orders for the X2 on February 1st. And when we accept orders on February 1st, the lead time is basically, will probably be at 4 weeks. The environment that I mentioned in my previous two webinars, the electronics environment is one of longer and longer lead times. And so launching a new product in this environment is very challenging. So effectively, right now, we can only guarantee 4-week lead time for many of our products. And so we definitely encourage you in general, not just for the X2, communicate with your customers, make sure they understand the environment has changed and is changing, and that stocking at their location as well as potentially at your location with buying commitments is an aspect of business that they really need to take a look at if they haven't been doing it already. Okay, so accepting orders for the X2 February 1st with lead times of 4 weeks after receipt of the order. And then the UL approval date is approximately April. And as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, we have no concerns whatsoever about getting that sticker at the appropriate time. It's just we want to get this product in the hands of developers because OEMs are our target, and we want to get them started on the development cycle as early as possible. Also, we will be honoring the normal 50% discount for distributor demos for at least the first 60 days of the launch. So, and you won't have to buy it carton quantities or box quantities. So if you want to buy some demos for your team, for demonstration purposes to show around, or maybe to put in your demo rooms, you can purchase those at half off list price. No problem, and you don't have to buy 24 at a time to get that accomplished, and we'll be supporting that at least in the first 60 days of the launch. Now let's talk about our web approach, because this is a product where, to a certain extent, it does lend itself to people, finding it on the web to a certain extent. First of all, from a web promotion standpoint, we absolutely will be promoting a customer X2 starter kit that we will sell them on the web for $199 for one-time purchase. We want to get the X2 in the hands of customers, preferably OEM volume customers, but we want to get those products in their hands so they can start using it. Secondly, everyone's concerned about the support that these low-end customers could effectively burden technical resources with. That's why, as I mentioned earlier, web training is key. So we will have a full X2 online training video course available for new prospects as well as customers to go through to get them fully trained up on the product to relieve the strain on existing technical resources. Now, let's talk about ongoing web orders. As most of you know, we have an online web store and have had for many years. We will be selling, as I mentioned before, the X2 starter kit for $199. However, online purchases other than the starter kits from the Horner web store will be at the list price of $235. And then, as always, we treat online sales as leads for our sales channel partners. So what might start out as somebody kicking the tires or making a low volume purchase online, hopefully will turn into a local long-lasting business relationship for our channel partners and more lucrative levels of business for all of us. Okay, so again, just to summarize the web strategy, get the X2 in the hands of as many OEMs as possible, get them fully trained up using web-based materials, and then get those turned over to the appropriate channels for ongoing business.